Welcome back, everyone, to the newest episode of the CyberSec sessions. Joined here today by Stephen Bay, Director of Cyber Operations and Services at Kudelski Security. Stephen, thanks so much for your time here today.
Great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'll get straight into our first question now. For those listening that don't know, due to an unfortunate incident a few years ago, you've become a bit of an expert on dealing with insider threats. Would you be able to sort of run through the audience through a brief overview of your career and how that sort of unique perspective that you've got has been benefiting the Kudelski team now?
Sure, happy to do that. So I've been in cybersecurity for 20 plus years, spanning both government and commercial cybersecurity work. Over the first 12 years of my career, I was an analyst and a contractor at the National Security Agency, both with the military and as a contractor. And during that time, I was the boss of Edward Snowden when Edward Snowden ended up doing what he did in 2013 and fled the country to Hong Kong and later to Russia. And so I was in the thick of that, in the middle of it, and had to work through him as an insider threat and what had happened to NSA and what happened to the company that I worked for, Booz Allen Hamilton, etc. And it also was an experience that changed the course of my career. It caused me to have to leave the working in national security, working in the intelligence community, going into the commercial world. And fortunately, things worked out from there. But it certainly had opened my eyes to the reality and the risks associated with people and with insider threats and what we face, right? I think I don't know that many would debate that Snowden is the quintessential insider threat example, regardless of whether one thinks that what he did was a good thing or a bad thing. That's kind of irrelevant to the fact that he was indeed an insider threat. And so that's really shaped the lessons that I learned from it have really shaped both how I engage my customers today in talking about insider threat. I work in consulting and help customers kind of solve their cybersecurity problems. It's helped me to kind of develop what I think are some somewhat unique approaches to insider threats and detection and how we protect ourselves. And things that we shouldn't do as well that may seem somewhat logical to us, or at least cautions, right? So yeah, it was clearly probably the most impactful event of my career, being involved in the thick of that, for good and for bad, right? It was a lot of negativity that came out of it, but with difficult challenges, open up new doors of opportunity.
Exactly that. And it's an angle we haven't really had anyone on the series so far talk about. So it's amazing, given that, as you say, the potential risks there. So it would be good to give the audience a bit of an idea. What advice can you give to best protect against insider threats?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think the first thing that I would say is, and then I think the big mistake that a lot of organizations make when they think about defending against insider threat, especially at the CISO level and maybe even the CIO level, is as a domain, insider threat isn't a cybersecurity domain in and of itself. It's a people problem, right? Insiders are people. And I believe that organizations that create insider threat programs and put it directly under or wholly under, say, the CISO, and let the CISO have full reign at it are probably doing it wrong. I think it's being a people issue. It's bigger than information security. Clearly, information security has an element of it, a big element of it, right? They may be responsible for the technology and the protections and those sorts of things that we deploy to protect ourselves from it. But it's probably needs to either sit at HR, or if it does sit within cyber, there's dotted lines all over the place, right? To various executives within the company to be able to provide their input to it, and to how that program looks. So that's number one, is remember that insider threat is a people problem. It is not wholly a technology problem. That being said, there are technology solutions that I would recommend. I would obviously recommend pursuing things like the zero trust model, to deploy across your environment, right? Microsegmentation and of people in particular can limit access to the types of databases, systems, etc., that people have access to. If an insider threat deploys some sort of malware, which isn't uncommon. It happens. Even microsegmentation of the network can limit where that malware can reach and access, etc. So I think that's a really important element as well, is just having the right technical controls in place to both handle your identity, the people within your environment, and handle the way your network is configured. And then, there's a lot of other technical solutions. We could probably go on for hours discussing it. But one of the things I've become increasingly passionate about is I've talked with CISOs and their challenges, and I've observed different insider threat programs as I've helped both build them and consult on them and just continue to make that a core part of my career, is, again, remembering that it being a people problem. If we look at insider threat as a risk, we need to make sure we're tracking and monitoring, say, just among our security and organizational risk as a whole. It being a people problem means our culture and the way we treat our people becomes really, really important, right? As security leaders, it's often very natural for us to want to lock everything down, not trust anything, right? Go back to even the term zero trust sounds intriguing to a lot of us security leaders because, oh, good, I'm not going to trust anything in my environment. I'm going to wall it off. I'm going to wildly protect it and all that. The risk you have is with that mentality is, yes, that's a pretty solid solution for how you construct your network and how you can construct your security controls. If that mentality boils over into the way you treat your people, the way you manage your people, into HR, into the culture of the company, it can be, you can increase your risk of insider threats, right? What drives insider threats? Well, the one is obviously, I think in Snowden's case, for instance, it was a mix of personal preference and personal belief that drove him to do what he did, right? Very privacy centric, very libertarian, etc. But and similarly, standard insider threats, especially like in the money area, may be driven by personal finances or debt or whatever it may be. But a lot of what drives insider threats too, and one way you decrease risk is the way that they feel like they're treated and appreciated. And it's my belief and understanding that the better your culture, the better your environment, the less hostile workplace it is to work, and the more appreciated people feel, the less likely it is they're going to take some sort of insider threat action. You're decreasing that risk. And so the last thing I'll say on that is, don't let the zero trust mentality flow into your environment. If your people feel like they aren't trusted, they're not appreciated, if they're not given the freedom to work the way that they feel like they need to be able to work, to have access to things they need to have access to, all in the name of security, you risk creating a hostile, a hostile work environment in which you're increasing that risk that you're going to be hit by an insider. So you really got to balance that really well. Your culture becomes a very critical piece.
It's really true, really important way of looking at it, people aspect. It's so easy in cyber to just look at the technology, but it's a huge piece in there. Absolutely. And well, that ties quite nicely into the next question I wanted to ask them. So when, the worst happens, something like the Snowden leaks or the supply chain issues we saw with, like CrowdStrike the other week, for example, what advice can you give to cybersecurity leaders on how to handle themselves but also their teams?
Yeah, it's a really important thing to think about ahead of time, and that's probably the first thing I would go into is preparation. When everything with Snowden hit in June of 2013, that June 9th was the worst day of my career. It was a pretty awful day, and I fell into a panic, and not my wife saw it. It happened to be a Sunday, so people at church saw it. I was luckily able to shield some of that from my employees, but I was a relatively young manager and young leader. It was kind of the first team that I had full responsibility for without some sort of co-leader in place in my career. And so, I was fortunate that even though I was one of those people that thought something like that would never happen to me, and I think it's really natural for us to think, oh yeah, that sort of thing happens to other people. Those crises happen to them. I think it's easy to think that way. And for me, I was fortunate that some of the positive ways that I responded came naturally. But one of the things that really surprised me was how strong the urge to quote CYA, if you will, right, to protect myself was, right. I fortunately didn't do anything unethically. I didn't run away from responsibility or anything like that. But that urge was there. And fortunately for me, I had done a little bit of preparation, not in terms of how would I respond if something like this happened, but in terms of building out my own kind of code of ethics for how I would function as a leader, and trying to do things the right way and trying to do things ethically, etc. And having that little code of ethics, even though it was immature and I hadn't spent a whole ton of time thinking through that, it kind of helped me navigate that day. And I would say one of the most important, so that's number one, right, is know who you are, understand your own personal code of ethics, and stick to those. Don't let, like, there's been, I won't throw any organizations under the bus, but I would imagine that most of us can think of global cybersecurity incidents where executive teams did very unethical things that we all would shame them for, and really upset a lot of people and impacted the company's reputation, anything like that. And you don't want to be one of those people. You want to be able to be a person that when you wake up the next morning, you're proud of yourself, and despite the horrors of it all, right? So that's number one, is have your code of ethics and hold to it. Number two, this might not be a very popular sentiment among executives, but even though I was concerned about the global impact of what happened with Snowden for both Booz Allen Hamilton and for NSA, etc. On the day that it happened, when that panic set in, not only was I worried about the impact it would have on me, I was also worried about, my mind went crazy. It kind of was like, and all my reaction was that not only am I going to go to jail and lose my family, lose my job, but Booz Allen's going to lose all their government contracts, and NSA collection and intelligence from across the board is going to be ruined, and terrorists are going to run wild. So all those things kind of fell on my shoulders. But what I realized after that initial panic set in, and as I kind of did my own after action, looking through how I responded that day, I realized I didn't care about the stock price of Booz Allen. I didn't care about how much money they might lose, or I didn't even care really as much about what was going to happen to me. Yeah, that was a fear and a concern. But for me, my biggest concern was for the people that worked for me on the team, and the people that I had responsibility over. I had 13 to 15, I can't remember exactly, people that worked under my supervision at the time. And I was really concerned that come Monday or the next week, they were all going to be out of jobs. And we all lived on Hawaii, and very few of us, if any of us, were actually from Hawaii. And how are we going to find new jobs and those sorts of things? And so I took the time to call them all that day when the news broke. Most of them didn't know him very well. Ed only worked for me for a month and a half when all this happened. He was a new employee. But taking the time to make sure my people were okay is probably one of the things I'm most proud of coming out of that incident. And so when crisis hits, remember what's most important, right? It isn't necessary. Yes, I know the stock price is important in the company, and because a company employs thousands of people often, and you don't want that to go under and those people to be impacted as well. But it becomes very personal, and it becomes very difficult to navigate, and people that are impacted by it that work for you are all going to be affected by it differently. So to me, the two biggest lessons is to maintain your personal ethical code and take care of your people. Make sure that they are okay.
Since you're relying on them, so when they look to you, you've got to, they're relying on you as well.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Great. Well, thanks so much for running through that. Getting to the last couple of questions now. Then the one, my broad question that I always ask is, what do you think personally the biggest threat in cybersecurity is at the moment, and why?
Yeah, so I think it's still likely realistically, I think the biggest threat is still ransomware. whether it's perpetrated by malware, by phishing, or the various ways in which ransomware can impact your organization. As I talk to CISOs, as I talk to security leaders, the biggest concern I hear is about how AI is impacting everything, right? How are AI threats impacting me? How do when I deploy AI solutions into my environment, how do I make sure that my data is protected and the AI, the third-party AI isn't stealing all of my data? And then, how do I use AI to help my security, right? So it's kind of across the gamut there. So that might be the biggest concern that I'm hearing in the industry, and I totally get that and understand that. I mean, we got Black Hat and DEF CON next week, and I'm going to be eating up all the AI talks and events that we're going to be attending while we're there, right? But I still think from an actual realistic threat, ransomware continues to be, probably, I don't know, 5 years running perhaps, to be the big concern that we have. And you layer in, though, ransomware, the threat that's very real and the money that's being lost with ransomware, with the evolution in technology with AI and how quickly AI is evolving. And even if many of us feel like AI is a little bit overhyped beyond, we'll probably give it more credit than it's worth in terms of how smart it really is. It's evolving very, very quickly. The advancements in the technologies in AI, and you start layering that into the way hackers are using AI and AI's ability to hide and increasing AI increasing ransomware and really any malware ability to hide on a network or in an environment, or to quietly grab and steal and exfiltrate data, and maybe even using AI as how easy it is to gain knowledge and information as hackers prepare their ransomware attacks to help them have a better, I guess, compelling story, if you will, for how they convince a company to pay the ransom, and how much to ask for. Is kind of changing the domain. So I think ransomware continues to be the biggest threat that we face, especially as we layer in the potential impact that AI will have on ransomware.
Awesome. Yeah, very interesting point there. Fantastic. And then the last question. So what can you recommend to teams that are looking to attract and then, more importantly, retain cyber talent at the moment?
That's the $1 million question right there, right? I think we're all facing that problem. There's such a huge demand for cyber talent, and a lack of, I don't know if there's a lack of talent coming in, but certainly there's a trend in cybersecurity to, when we say we're going to hire entry level, it means 3 to 5 years of experience, which makes no sense to me. But, one, I would say to attract talent, obviously, you need to be competitive with pay and benefits. That's the first thing people are going to look at. But people are increasingly concerned about the culture and the environment in which they work, right? They want to be able to go to a place where they wake up feeling like there's an element of value, that they feel appreciated, they feel valued, and that they're doing something valuable and important. And it doesn't mean you have to go, to feel like your job is valuable and important, doesn't mean you have to go work for a nonprofit and be altruistic in that regard, right? I think it's more that they feel like that they're contributing to the good of something bigger than themselves, right? That by, being able to do something meaningful in cybersecurity, they're protecting individuals, of people's livelihoods and their careers, etc. So kind of giving them a positive reason for why they should work for you, and then creating a work environment that is really healthy, people enjoy, they feel appreciated, is really appealing. I think one of the big hard things that we face is when we get people coming in. I think we all know in the industry, let me put it this way. We all know in the industry that the fastest way for us to make more money is probably to job hop, right? It's be at a company for a year or two, get our experience, knowing that inside that company, we're probably not going to get the pay raises that we could get if we jump to the next job and next career. And so companies need to kind of look at how are they doing pay and benefits, and how are they handling, but I think culture is a really important part of it. And I'm also hearing, as I talk to my own employees, like I've got my relatively small team right now, I haven't had anybody willingly leave in 3 years, which is pretty shocking. I expect at least one of them to go by now. And a lot of it is because, I try to be a leader that doesn't micromanage and helps them feel appreciated, takes care of them financially, gives them meaningful work to do, but lets them thrive and lets them be creative and build on their strengths. And that's really important. But the other thing, so that's kind of those are some of the ideas I have on attracting and retaining talent, is that element of it. But one thing I want to add in this regard is I think more and more companies need to not be afraid to bring in very green college students or people with no, like, I think, by the way, in cybersecurity, the requirement to have a degree, I think, is silly. How many incredible cybersecurity people are out there that were hackers in their mom and dad's basement who never went to college and are incredible, right? When I hire, even though my company has a bit of, can get a little uppity about degrees, I care way more about your expertise and your drive and your passion and what you're looking for, right? I'd much rather hire the kid who hacked their school, their high school's environment, learn their lesson to not do that, but is passionate about it, than I would a person who's got a master's degree in cyber, but it just kind of did it because it was a thriving industry and doesn't really have any expertise, right? But my point being is, don't be afraid to take a chance on good, young, new talent. And one of the things that I recommend to organizations is don't be afraid to partner with universities as an entity. Like, your company should be partnering with a couple different universities to provide and offer internships and entry and hiring practices, etc., with universities you trust. You can, and by doing that, you can help shape the way those universities are doing their cybersecurity programs. And you can attract talent, and you can find people that are going to appreciate the work you do. And yeah, you're going to get those kids that you're going to train, and after 6 months are going to leave, but many are going to stay. And if you have a good culture and you're competitive and you reward them for good work, you're going to find success. So, in retaining them. So those are some of the ideas I have. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but those are some thoughts that's been on my mind on that topic.
Right. It's definitely the case. Getting more people into the industry only benefits everyone long term. So
Agree.
It's definitely to go for. Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Stephen. It's been a really, really interesting session today. Hope the listeners enjoy as well. But I'd just like to say thank you again for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, James.
Yes.